So today we will talk about memory, DRAM, dynamic RAM. So we introduced random access memory. So it is typically used in the on-chip cache. In this lecture, we will talk about DRAM, dynamic RAM. Dynamic refresh. You just keep your DRAM static, you will lose your data slowly. So typically we introduce so you use 6 transistors to store one single bit. But for the DRAM, you just need one transistor and one capacitor. So the density of DRAM is very high. So this is the alpha. One inverter costs 2 transistors. So 2 inverters totally cost 4 transistors. Besides these, you also have 6. But for the DRAM, you only have 1 transistor. And you also have a capacitor. You have some charges in the cell, then the cell can represent 1. If the capacitor is empty, has no charge, it represents 0. Dig a very deep hole on the die, and use this hole as the one single trench compared to the upfront fabricating this one single one. You need 1 gigabyte or 8 gigabyte DRAM. You will have a helium. Fabricating them uniform is very difficult. So here is one example of the row decoder can decode one active one row. The robot and then the mask array. So you can see that the larger array and including the row decoder, column max, and the row buffer, and the sense amplifier. So the array level organization of DRAM is very similar to the SRAM, but the cell is just single-ended. Each RAID operation is destructive. I will explain this point in the following slides. So the row buffer will temporarily hold the data you want to read. the data will be sensed in a row into the row buffer. So one row will be sensed. And the row buffer can temporarily store that row. So if you have a following grid, you won't have to read directly read the data from the row buffer. So here is the destructive rate of DRAM. So you can see that there are paths. So if you sell hacks, the volume of the cell if the cell has no charge, the volume of the cell. Then we need to figure out a method to rate the volume of the cell. So the theta of the R speed, you have to charge the volume R. You can always charge the volume of this is so-called feedback to half. No matter you use it or what, you can charge it to half. Before the rate, you don't need more manual. So no matter so that feedback. So if you相害some time and 下模拟的低，然后低大模拟高，will be increased because the charge will move from to the baseline. Baseline will get some charges. Only but since the charge is leading from the cell with cell. On the other hand, you cell has no charge. Is not flow from so you cannot drag down close to zero. But you cell will that's the top. By sensing the trend, the sun amplifier can know the value inside the cell. This is how we read from the cell. But the problem is that after the read operation, this is not applied. The data has been destroyed during the read operation in the cell. Although at the end of the read operation, based on the changes, you can understand that the value, whether the value is 0 or 1. But the data inside the cell has been destroyed. So this is what will happen. After you select it, after you want to read it, some cell have some different colors. Then you send sample file will sense the data. So now you have no data. Why? Because of the destructive rate. The data is stored in the SRAM. I'm sorry, I sent sample file. And then the data at this time step, you can have two options. The first one is because you have no write the data back to the cell immediately. All you can do is hold it data so that the following the former scheme is a so-called closed row policy because you write back and you want to close that row. But the later policy, you just keep, if you keep your data I will explain the differences between these two policies and the advantages and the disadvantages of these policies. So even you don't read your data without write so your cell needs some time. If you do nothing, gradually the body of the cell. So after some, after some threshold, then you have to periodically refresh the cell, write the cell, read the cell, write the cell. This is so-called a refresh. You have different policies on the refresh. Either you can do your, let the CPU do the job for a while, and then everything has to be stopped, and then do the refresh. Particularly now, even your mobile phone has let's say 16 gigabyte or 8 gigabyte. Each piece of memory can periodically refresh itself. Each array can refresh itself. This is so-called distributed refresh. So each small piece of array can refresh by itself. But the refresh will involve the memory controller. The memory controller will control the refresh. For some low power mode, the controller can turn off so that the memory array itself will do the refresh. So I will explain the sequence. What will happen if you want to read the data from the memory? your CPU will generate a request first. And send a request to the low level so that why you have to have a memory controller? Because you can buy the DRAM manufactured by different companies. So the CPU now handles so many details. You need another controller to translate the request from the instructions. For example, if your request is a readout, you remember first. Active one row means so far root over. And then the data of the whole word will be set to the set wording over. So this is the activation point. Activation point. The activation point sends the data of the root to the platform. And then the memory controller will issue another command means global control command. Issue that I want to specify each portion in this row. Maybe this one, maybe this one. You can column B. So you can select this part or this side. You will have to wait long. After you specify the column address, the IO will send out the data back. And then the memory controller will receive. Of course, there is a clock, and you need to wait for a certain number of cycles to get all your data. And then the memory controller will so that the CPU can get the data in the request. So you can see that there are a lot of the CPU will generate the memory controller calculates activation, load column and the data transfer. And the total here is the timing of the readout. You first enable the load and second, you can column polymer. And when you have data coming out from DRAM, and you send another rule, send another polymer coming out from the ring. So curious line indicates when you want to set different rows. This line indicates what you want to assume that your application behavior is very good. You have very strong spatial locality. You just need one single row. Then you won't have to set the row again. Different columns of the data in the row. So in this case, you know, if you can your data can hit in the same row, the latency will be shorter. All the DRAM even has the point super first. You set a one support four pieces of data or 8 pieces of data. So these 8 pieces of data or 4 pieces of data will form a burst. Or you can use the rising rate of and falling rate of this double rate, DDR can increase the speed of the data transfer and reduce the latency of the data transfer. But it cannot help so you can see this is the real signal. You can transfer the data through this rising or the falling and the falling edge, or and the falling edge. So you expect this rising is very deep. Steep is very steep. You will immediately reach this VDD. You don't want a very slow rising. Why? You want the signal. The signal is very clear. The signal is rising and falling at speed. Very easy for you to distinguish whether it's a 0 or 1. If the rising is very steep and falling is very steep, the area in this middle part will be very large. This area actually is called data I. If you have a very large data I, that means your signal is very clear. And your signal integrity is very good. But you can see that you have a lot of noise. This rising end has a lot of noise. So the area is high. This is not a good. Compared to this one compared to the right left part better signal. So you can see that no matter how big your D1 data is digit 1 or 0. So it's very easy. The underlying structure of the D1 is actually So you need to guarantee the signal package. You need either distance between two points. If there are more than one signal transferring between these two points, you guarantee this line. And you need to guarantee the length of this line. I think so. Sometimes you will intentionally add some to keep the distance, to keep the line length of the different line here are the same. So in order to maintain the analog signal integrity, you have to routing stuff. And these routing techniques can have a huge impact on the data. In the DRAM, we also have a complex bank. Each bank is the smallest component. Each can independently serve one request, which means that if you have n banks, you can send n requests to different banks. Each bank can serve one request. And you have different policies when you use these banks. Either you interleave your work, different work into different banks like this. So what's the benefit when you do this? The benefit is that your application has a strong visual pattern. Sometimes you need a word there. 1 from 0 to n minus 1. Assume that you sequentially access one array. Each element is one word. So by putting them into different factors, you increase the so-called bank level parity. By putting these words into different, by putting these words into different factors, you use the bank parallelism to hide the latency. Otherwise, you have to read all these elements from one bank sequentially. So this is a typical layout of DRAM. On your this is EIFF. On your D, you have different directions. So each sheet 128 megabytes. So if you have a 1 gigabyte DRAM, you have you have and multiple banks. But you can see that all the banks share same address box and control pins. But you can independently access individual. And the data box with each chip here at one time, at one cycle, at no one. So because you have many chips here, quality, they can provide you the entire cache line. about 12 bits. As we talk about, because the high sometimes we have some redundant to store the ECC error correcting code. So the simplest scenario is that you can talk to the beam through the data and talk why the data bus have two layers. Right. But your command bus has only one direction. Only your microcontroller can send some command to the DRAM. Now your DRAM has no brain, has no decision. Your DRAM cannot do anything without the memory controller, except the self-refresh. All you can do is memory controller DIMMs. These two DIMMs can share the same format, but have a two data bus. All you use is and you use the back of this. But again, there will be no traffic jam on the common. So when you have a different DIMMs, when you have a different banks, when you have a different one run, different run means batteries two DIMMs share the same address. If they share if they are many, then they are in the same rank. When you have the bank rank memory controller concept, you need to have a lot of mapping on them. The different mappings can achieve different parallelisms. And of course, your different application may favor different mappings. You can put your conceptual equation put your all you different policy may have a different advantage. For this one, you can achieve higher funding level. Because when you read the biofuels, you can read it. Remember, we have the low buffer. All you put into the same so that we can store increase the low buffer rate by this rate. And the address mapping also have an impact on the open row and closed row policy. So after you read your data to the sense amplifier, you can keep your data into the sense amplifier. This is so-called open page policy. Open page policy, you hope that all of the can access the same row. So in this case, you don't need to activate that row again. You can just directly send the data from your row buffer to the bus, to the data bus. That's all. However, if your application has a very low spatial locality, your application will request for another row. Then you have to close this, open the row first, and then open another row, and then send out the data. So in this case, you would rather use close. After each request, you close the row first, and then open a new row. So the open page policy is friendly to the application has strong spatial locality. But the closed row policy is friendly to the application has a little spatial locality. And then this is the structure for your computer. So remember, this is the box to be complete. So not, and this is the box from the back, from the side. So your memory controller can talk to the DRAM. Your memory controller can also talk to the high-speed device. This is some old input. Now PCI Express. And your memory controller can also handle low. So somehow your software is also part only can talk to some low speed devices, including the disk and some USB flash drive. So in this picture, the most important part, particularly the box is very important. So you want to have a high frequency for this box. Yes. So this is a good question. When you try to buy a SSD, you can carefully look up the buses. They have a different configuration. Some SSD can be plugged into the PCIe. So these high-end SSD can have a high speed, but some low-end SSD will be plugged into this part. So when you buy SSD, the price difference can be huge. Yes. If you again, when we talk about the chips here, so your SSD also, we will talk about SSD next lecture or the lecture after. So your SSD also provide different chips, even multiple chips to support the large bandwidth. The high speed means you have a lot of chips so that they can work together to support the high speed, the high bandwidth. But on the contrary, your flash drive only may have one single chip. So only that chip each time can provide maybe 16 bit. You don't care about latency anymore. Just each time 16 bit, each time 16 bit. So it's cheaper. You only have a few chips. But the speed of one single SSD chip are the same, no matter in high-end configuration or low-end configuration. The difference is how many chips you have. High-end has a lot of chips, but the low-end design has only several chips. So this is the, what will happen on the real motherboard. This is software. You can see that they intentionally build this software close to the CPU. But the software is close to the USB part of the interface. Yes. And this software is also close to DRAM. Only in this case, signals do not have to travel a very long distance. So this is some old motherboard. Now the recent motherboard directly fabricate the NOR into your CPU. So now your CPU and your memory controller are fabricated on the same die. So you don't have a NOR anymore. You just use your CPU, memory controller on the CPU to manage the DRAM. And this is the software. So typically, when Intel or AMD release another generation of CPU, you can not use your motherboard anymore, old motherboard anymore. Why? Because they simply change the NOR bridge and the source bridge. So your motherboard has the source bridge or NOR bridge, but if you have the newer CPU, your latest CPU cannot manage this old source bridge or NOR bridge. That's the reason why you have to buy a new motherboard if you want to upgrade your CPU. And your memory controller in charge of translating the request from CPU into some DRAM package. So they have three queues: read, write, and count. Read queue, write queue, buffer the write, for example, write, read, write. This response to store data, return data, the data fetched from DRAM. And then you have the scheduler. Your scheduler can work, can reorder the request so that, for example, the first request goes to the row A, your second request goes to row B, but your third request also goes to row A. Then in this case, your scheduler can reorder the second request and third request so that the two consecutive requests can go to the same row. You don't have to activate the row again. Besides the reordering, the memory controller also has refresh row buffer policy, whether it's an open page or closed page, and address mapping. Here, I just want to emphasize on the row buffer management. After you activate one row, you send your data to the SenSampling firm, and your SenSampling firm send the data to the row buffer. You have two different options. Now the data is inside the row buffer, and the cell has no data because you have a destructive read. In this case, you have two options. The first one is open page. The second one is closed. Either you actively write the data back. This is a closed page policy. In this case, you hope that the following has no key in, because you have already write the data back and close them. When the next request arrives in the debug, you can immediately activate the method. You don't have to close the row again because you have already done that. So in this case, you hope the following has no penalty, no. But the open page, on the contrary, the open page expect the following request has a strong spatial locality, can hit in the row buffer. Only in this case, you can keep the row open and expect the following request. So if you predict correct, then you can directly send the data out because the data is in the row. Otherwise, you have to close the row and activate another. So this is the difference. So the scheduling on the VRAM is very simple. It's the first come, first serve. But sometimes you need to guarantee whether the array is available. So you can change this policy to the first array. Which means that if your row has been opened, you can scan your request in the read queue and then issue the request. Go to the opened row because the row has been opened, it's ready. So if you have some request hit in that row, you can let these requests go first. This is so-called the first. So by giving the request that go to the same row, higher priority to actually prioritize columns over row change. Why? In this case, you hope the row has no change. All the requests go to the same column. I'm sorry, go to the same row, but different columns. So even some request arrive even earlier. If it does not hit in the same row, it has to be delayed. So if no request you are using the only. The request scheduling is very difficult. Why? The DRAM is a very developed techniques. the size, the capacity of the DRAM is huge. So in order to provide such large capacity, you need billions of cells. And of course, they are different. So in order to tolerate these differences, you need a lot of time. For example, you can issue you need to wait certain effect, and then you can issue a write after the result. And the two requests cannot go to the same file without any delay. You have to wait if you want to issue two requests into the same file. And your memory controller also needs to track different results better. This year. Again, different DRAM companies have different techniques. So they have different values for the parameters. And your memory controller has to know that to make the correct decision. Again, because your DRAM capacity is huge, the latency is also very long. Actually, one large node or larger array cost a lot of cycles, very long latency. So how to overcome this? Then you can increase the so-called memory level parity. You can issue multiple layers. So in this way, you can reduce the average latency. Here is some equation to compute the average latency when we consider the DRAM. We have already done this for the cache. So now we consider the memory parallelism, memory level parallelism in the DRAM. So assume the cache heat is 10 cycles. Memory has 100 cycles. Assume the cache has 50%. What's the average? So 50%. The other 50%. So this is the average. However, if you increase your memory level parallelism beyond one, for example, you have 2 max or 4 max or 8 max, you can convert 5. At the same time, you can have 4. What about happen? Then you can directly use why you can do this? Because the memory level parallelism does not only improve the DRAM, but also the cache. So in this case, we that the cache can also simultaneously serve 4 requests or 5 requests. Because nowadays, almost every application has needed to process the big data, so the memory dominant the performance, and the memory level parallelism becomes more and more important. In order to reduce the latency, on the memory card, you can encode that. You can encode that. And you can do the protection. You can predict what will be read, what will be fetched in the following cycles, so that you can pre-fetch the data. Any questions? So if you no question, you can stop. Again, you can find a partner to work with you on the project too.